Well, thank you very much, Sophie, and good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here today in what is proving to be, I think, a fairly interesting time in British politics. We're in the middle of a huge political upheaval, and of course, with upheaval comes uncertainty, not least for businesses, with many of you being concerned about a new Prime Minister with an unknown economic agenda, speculation about possible further tax rises, and the prospect of the government moving the goalposts yet again. So I know this will be a time where many of you will naturally be worried about the future, about uncertainty. So let me say something right up front about the current political situation. That it would be a disaster, not just for business, but for our wider economy, if we were to see a repeat of the uncertainty and speculation which we saw last year around the Chancellor's budget. You'll recall the flying of every possible conceivable mooted increase in taxation at that time. And Andy Haldane memorably called that the fiscal fandango and said that it undoubtedly had a chilling effect on the economy, something that was also backed up by the Office for Budget Responsibility. And the risk now, ladies and gentlemen, is that with a new government coming in, most likely led by Andy Burnham, is that we may see a sequel to that. We've heard nothing of note from Andy Burnham about his economic plans. He's talked about various potential new spending commitments without saying much about how he would pay for them. And he's shown no sign, so far at least, of any willingness to grasp the nettle on restraining spending in areas like our ballooning welfare bill. And of course, we still do not know who he will appoint as his Chancellor. So inevitably, there is uncertainty and speculation about the potential for more tax increases. If Andy Burnham does not rule out coming back for yet more tax rises on business, there is a clear risk that investment and hiring decisions are put on hold once again as the budget approaches later this year. British business is still reeling from the bombardment of tax rises and regulations this government have unleashed since they came into office. And on top of that, they have had to weather a number of other storms. The impacts of the Iranian conflict, US tariffs last year, and all of that coming along after the energy crisis caused by the Ukraine war and, of course, the pandemic before that. Every time businesses try to get up on their feet, it seems that something comes along to knock them back again. There is already more than enough uncertainty in the world today, and the government should not be adding to it. Andy Burnham needs to understand that even though he may not be Prime Minister yet, he is already having an impact on our economy. We saw that when our gilt yields rose sharply on his announcement that he'd be running for Parliament. The positive lever he has at his fingertips right now is to provide certainty. So I am urging him today, on this platform, to give us a straight answer, to rule out more tax rises on business. Now, this government have failed in no small part because they simply do not understand how business works. Any new Prime Minister has to show that he gets that and that he will not repeat the same mistakes. If Andy Burnham chooses not to do that, he is seriously thinking about doing more of the same, of taxing and regulating businesses and thinking that will solve our problems, then he will ultimately suffer the same fate as Keir Starmer. Government needs to start treating business as a solution to the problems we face, not as part of those problems. Because the only way we are going to dig ourselves out of our current economic hole is through the investment, the innovation, the ingenuity and the dynamism of British business. What we as Conservatives know is that growth will not come from more government, more regulation, more tax rises, more subsidies, spending or nationalisation. We have already had enough of that. Growth will only come, ultimately, from the private sector. And that is why organisations like the British Chambers of Commerce are so important. And why it is so vital that leaders like Andy Haldane, who I've known for many years and respect immensely, are lending their voices to the cause of British business. Now, I know it's easy for politicians to talk about the importance of business. And that too often, when they do, it is difficult to discern the world in which that talk is anchored. So I want to make it clear that I come to the role of Shadow Chancellor with a background in business. Not long after leaving university, I set up my own business. That was in the mid-1980s. And over the following decades, I built companies from scratch, from the bottom up, both here and in the United States. I decided to take a different path from many of my peers. I was determined to build something myself. And I remember what that was like. It was exciting and fulfilling, but it came with huge challenges as well. The sleepless nights, the tough decisions, the constant paperwork, the burden of responsibility, knowing other people's jobs hang on your choices and the risks you take. And that feeling that is too often present of the relentless desire of the state to present every possible hurdle to success. So when I talk about understanding what it's like to run a business, that is something that I have lived. Business is where I come from. It is in my being. It factors into virtually everything that I do as Shadow Chancellor. And the fact that this Labour government does not have people with that outlook is, I think, the root of many of the mistakes that have been made. One of the first things Rachel Reeves did as Chancellor was to impose a £25 billion jobs tax on employers, the single biggest tax-raising measure we have ever seen in modern times. We've been crippling business rates, especially for our high streets. An inheritance tax rate on family businesses has left many worried that they will have to sell or break up their companies. A mountain of new employment regulation that has made hiring riskier and more expensive. And a dogmatic net zero agenda has left us with the highest industrial energy costs in the world, while the government also rules out benefiting from our own natural resources in the North Sea. If the people at the top of the Labour Party had any understanding whatsoever of how business works and how to actually deliver jobs and growth in our country, they would not have made these mistakes. The result of all of this has been nothing short of an economic tragedy. Because this is not just about statistics or what happens behind the closed doors of the boardroom. You see, what matters for business ultimately matters for ordinary working people. That is the fundamental problem with the approach many on the left take. They see business and workers as being inherently opposed to each other. They think that for workers' lives to improve, businesses must be reined in and regulated, a zero-sum game. We Conservatives know that that is a false dichotomy. They are interdependent. And in that sense, the outcome of Labour's policies has been entirely predictable. Unemployment up by around 300,000. 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. Youth unemployment skyrocketing. That's what happens when you introduce a jobs tax which hits youth jobs the hardest. It's what happens when you introduce employment laws which make it harder for employers to give a new worker a chance to prove themselves when they don't yet have a track record. And it's what happens when you raise business rates the most for sectors like hospitality and retail, which tend to employ young people. We're at risk of ending up with a lost generation of young workers. When I was Work and Pensions Secretary just a few years ago, the main problem we were facing in the labour market was inactivity, people dropping out of the labour market and not even looking for work. We had vast numbers of vacancies. Firms were crying out for staff. We needed to get people into jobs. Unemployment was near historic lows. But now unemployment is back. Firms are shedding jobs or putting hiring on hold. The BCC's own forecasts show unemployment is set to continue to rise, 5.2% by the end of this year, the highest level since the pandemic. It's quite clear that what we are doing right now is not working. We need a different approach. And that is why Kemi and I are determined to fight against declinism. We do not accept that this country is doomed to stagnation, but we do need to stop shooting ourselves in the foot. So our plan for a stronger economy is about identifying what has been going wrong and taking radical action to fix it. And the measures we have set out so far are just the start of that. Take young people, for example. We need to create opportunities for them. We need to give them hope. So we have said that we will get rid of the job-destroying regulations that Labour have introduced through their Employment Rights Act. We will reform higher education so that we end the scandal of 30% of those going to university being worse off than if they had not gone at all. We will invest instead in apprenticeships, guaranteeing that employers will have the funding they need to take on British youngsters as apprentices and offering an incentive for firms who do so. We will abolish business rates altogether for thousands of high street firms, many of which offer young workers their first job. We will abolish stamp duty on homes to get our housing market moving and help young people onto the property ladder. And we will reward those who go out and get a job with a first job bonus, a £5,000 tax cut, to give them a head start when they first enter the world of work. Those policies are a firm statement of where we stand as a party, committed to the importance of hard work and aspiration, of creating jobs and opportunities, and recognising the vital role which business plays in achieving those aims. We need to champion the risk takers, the entrepreneurs, the employers, the wealth creators, the makers. That is what we in the Conservative Party will do. Thank you.